The demon of Kiss, Gene Simmons, once claimed to have lived the wildest rock star life imaginable, boasting of thousands of women, unimaginable wealth, and a career that conquered arenas around the globe. But now, at 76 years old, the life of Gene Simmons looks far different than the image he built with fire-breathing theatrics and a wall of sound. His empire is cracking, old scandals have returned to haunt him, and even his own family has faced public disgrace. Behind his sharp tongue and business ventures lies a man carrying secrets, regrets, and a dark truth he never wanted the world to see. Stay with us, because that truth is something you would never expect. Gene Simmons' story begins not in the glamour of Los Angeles or the chaos of New York clubs, but in the ashes of war. Born Chaim Witz on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel, his earliest years were shaped by shadows his family never escaped. His mother, Flora Klein, had survived the Nazi labor camps of Hungary, forced to work in fields as a teenager, losing her parents and nearly her life. She never spoke often of what happened, but her silence carried the weight of everything she had endured. His father, Yehiel, had also fled Hungary, but by the time Gene was 6, the marriage collapsed. Poverty swallowed what little stability he had. Gene remembered nights when dinner was nothing more than bread and milk, and winters when he wore a coat stitched together from an army blanket. By 7, he was selling wild fruit on the roadside, a child already working to keep food on the table. He cried himself to sleep while his mother worked late in factories, sewing buttons until her hands blistered. His earliest lesson in life was survival. Never wait for someone else to rescue you, because no one will. School brought no relief. He was bullied for being different, for speaking with an accent, for being poor. But Gene found something that changed him: American comic books. Spider-Man and Superman weren't just drawings on paper. They were his escape, his silent teachers. He couldn't even read English yet, but he traced the words and taught himself, already fluent in Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish. By age 8, he was secretly learning his 4th language, English, because he refused to be left behind. In 1957, Flora made the decision that would alter everything. She and her son left Israel behind, boarding a ship to America with almost nothing. They arrived in Queens with no family to greet them, no savings, and barely a word of English between them. Chaim became Eugene Klein, and the American dream was not a dream at all. It was a struggle. His mother worked 15-hour shifts in factories, and young Gene adapted to a harsh new world on his own. Flush toilets and TV dinners amazed him, but the cruelty of being an outsider remained. He promised himself he would never be weak again, never be poor again, never let anyone laugh at him again. That vow would shape the rest of his life. By the early 1960s, Gene had begun constructing the persona that would one day tower over arenas. Watching television became his education. He memorized American slang, practiced accents, and studied pop culture until it became his second skin. When the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, Gene felt lightning strike. He wanted that life, that power, that moment where the world screams your name. He dabbled in small jobs, selling cactuses door to door, slicing meat at butcher shops, working in delis. He stayed sober, watching older kids lose themselves to alcohol while he calculated his every move. That discipline became his secret weapon. Girls noticed the difference. While others stumbled, Gene remained sharp, charming, and calculating. He began playing guitar, rehearsing for hours, and joining small bands, convinced music would be his escape. In 1968, he entered Sullivan County Community College and studied education, eventually teaching 6th grade in Spanish Harlem. For $75 a week, he stood in classrooms, but his mind was already on stage. He formed the band Wicked Lester with Paul Stanley, chasing every chance to be heard. When Wicked Lester failed, recording an album that was shelved by Epic Records, Gene refused to give in. Instead, he doubled down. By 1973, he and Paul rebuilt from the ashes, adding drummer Peter Criss and guitarist Ace Frehley. They weren't going to be just another band. They would be a spectacle. Drawing inspiration from horror films, comic books, and glam rock, they created Kiss. Gene transformed himself into the demon, painting bat wings around his eyes, breathing fire, spitting blood, and towering in leather and studs. He learned fire breathing from a professional, turning risk into art, danger into theater. The demon wasn't just a costume, it was armor. Every insecurity from his childhood, every moment of hunger and humiliation, every insult hurled at the immigrant boy with an accent, all of it became fuel for the character. On January 30th, 1973, Kiss played their first show at a tiny Queens club called the Coventry. Only 3 people showed up, but Gene Simmons, in his full demon makeup, blew fire into the darkness. It didn't matter how many were watching, he had finally become larger than life. Kiss didn't ease into fame, they detonated into it. The club grind of 73 turned into the juggernaut of 75 when Alive captured the shrieks, the smoke, and the fire in grooves that felt dangerous. The follow-up, Destroyer, proved it wasn't a fluke. Overnight, 4 kids in grease paint became America's most outrageous export. For Gene, this wasn't merely success, it was vindication. The immigrant kid who sold fruit by the roadside now breathed fire before 50,000 people, and with that power came appetite. Today, Gene's lifestyle reflects both wealth and weariness. He lives in sprawling mansions, drives luxury cars, and sells VIP experiences that cost more than most fans make in a month. He has investments in restaurants, cannabis companies, and media ventures. Outwardly, the empire remains intact, but cracks keep showing through the veneer. Public controversies, canceled shows, and allegations from former employees now stalk his legacy like shadows that grow longer each year. Even his most loyal fans have noticed a shift. What once felt like the energy of a hungry performer now feels like the weight of a man trying to hold on to relevance. Younger audiences mock him as out of touch, while older fans who once defended him quietly question whether their idol became the very thing rock once stood against: greed, exploitation, and excess. His claim of having slept with nearly 5,000 women, once delivered with bravado, now reads like a tragic boast from a man who spent decades running from intimacy. His family is proof of the toll. Shannon Tweed, the woman who stood by him for nearly 3 decades before he finally married her, has weathered humiliation, betrayal, and scandal in front of cameras. His son, Nick, faced public disgrace after plagiarism accusations tanked his comic book career. His daughter, Sophie, carving her own path, still cannot escape the shadow of being Gene Simmons' daughter. The very empire that was supposed to lift them instead dragged them into public storms they never asked for. And yet, even with all the controversy, there remains something undeniably human about Gene in these twilight years. The cracks in his armor, the moments when he admits his mother's suffering shaped him, the times when grief overwhelms his stage mask. Those glimpses remind us that behind the fire and theatrics is still Chaim Vitz, the boy from Israel who once cried himself to sleep in an empty house while his mother worked to keep them alive. The tragic turn of Gene Simmons' life is not just that scandal follows him, it's that after decades of fighting to never be powerless again, he finds himself a prisoner of his own empire. Every decision, every dollar, every headline has become part of the legacy he cannot escape. Fans still chant his name, but the whispers of betrayal, greed, and scandal echo just as loud. In the end, Gene Simmons' story isn't just about fame and fortune. It's about how the pursuit of power and control can devour the very man who craved it. At 76 years old, he is still the demon, but the mask has slipped enough for the world to see the man beneath, weary and haunted, staring at a legacy that feels both triumphant and tragically cursed. Kiss didn't ease into fame, they detonated into it. The club grind of 73 turned into the juggernaut of 75, when Alive captured the shrieks, the smoke, and the fire in grooves that felt dangerous. The follow-up, Destroyer, proved it wasn't a fluke. Overnight, 4 kids in grease paint became America's most outrageous export. For Gene, this wasn't merely success, it was vindication. The immigrant kid who sold fruit by the roadside now breathed fire before 50,000 people, and with that power came appetite. Backstage, the demon became a collector, not of guitars or cars, but of moments. He started snapping Polaroids after encounters, each photo a time-stamped trophy. Women holding a hotel key, a grin, a flash. Into the box box it went. In interviews, he'd boast of thousands of partners, a number insanely specific and deliberately shocking. People recoiled, others rolled their eyes, but that was the point. Overwhelm the room, control the narrative, never be small again. On stage, Gene turned menace into theater. Blood capsules, 7-inch heels, a bass line that throbbed like machinery. Off stage, the band began to wobble. Drugs crept in. Egos swelled. Ticket sales whipsawed as disco flirted with the sound, and core fans questioned the direction. The film Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park gave them ratings and ridicule in equal measure. Still, Simmons doubled down on the persona. If subtlety sold records, he never got the memo. The Polaroid box became legend, a private museum of conquest that said as much about control as it did about desire. Years later, when that archive surfaced in their reality show Orbit, it would become kindling, literally. But in the roaring mid-70s, it felt like proof that hunger could be fed, proof that the boy with the blanket coat had finally wrapped himself in something no one could take away: attention. The demon was printing money, printing myths, and, one click at a time, printing evidence that the life he'd built was as combustible as the fire he breathed. If the stage made Gene famous, the merch table made him rich. He grasped earlier than most that Kiss wasn't just a band, it was intellectual property with pulse. Action figures, lunchboxes, pinball machines, comic books with real blood mixed into the ink. If it could hold a logo, it could print $1. He pursued licensing with the zeal of a patent lawyer and the imagination of a carnival barker. Critics sneered, accountants applauded. Every contract was armor, every SKU a moat. When the makeup came off in 1983, it wasn't surrender. It was a pivot. Lick It Up refreshed the brand, and the catalog kept selling while the business blossomed. But the balance wobbled. Hollywood beckoned, and Simmons chased roles, cameos, and side hustles while bandmates seethed. He missed rehearsals. He took calls. He pitched. To some, he looked like a visionary. To others, he looked absent. Then came the trademark era. Public bids to plant flags on gestures and phrases, a reminder that Gene viewed culture as real estate. Fans read it as hubris. He framed it as protecting the brand. Meanwhile, VIP tiers multiplied. Platinum meet and greets, ultra-exclusive experiences, prices floated into the stratosphere, defended as value for superfans and derided as proof that the demon now worshipped only the bottom line. And yet, the ledger doesn't lie. The strategy worked spectacularly. Kiss became a billion-dollar cottage industry, touring like a freight train while royalties stacked. The question that lingered wasn't whether Gene could monetize wonder, but what it cost. Did the relentless licensing cheapen the magic, or preserve it by paying for bigger explosions and louder nights? Was he the savior of a brand, or its auctioneer? In the end, Simmons didn't separate art from commerce. He fused them. He turned identity into inventory and myth into merchandise. Genius? Exploitation? The answer depends on where you're standing. Front row with a signed bass, or outside the arena counting the zeros on the price tag. For decades, Gene Simmons wore his reputation like another layer of armor. The demon wasn't just spitting fire on stage, he was feeding the fire off it. By his own admission, the Polaroid box contained thousands of women, each one cataloged with clinical detail. But the bravado eventually became baggage. By the early 2000s, it was impossible to separate the showman from the scandal magnet. Shannon Tweed entered his orbit in 1983, fresh off being named Playmate of the Year. She was sharp, glamorous, and unlike anyone Gene had ever met. Their relationship became the through line of his personal life, spanning nearly 3 decades without marriage. On their reality show, Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, the couple played up the friction. Shannon wanted commitment. Gene ducked, weaved, and dismissed the idea. To him, marriage was a trap, a surrender of control. But the cracks widened. One of the show's most infamous moments came when Shannon confronted him with his secret Polaroid stash. Cameras rolled as she set fire to decades of trophies. For fans, it was symbolic, the demon being forced to face accountability for the empire of indulgence he'd built. Then came 2011. After 28 years of resisting, Gene stunned everyone by proposing to Shannon in front of cameras. The wedding that October was emotional, televised, and almost surreal. But insiders whispered it wasn't about romance. It was about damage control. Rumors of affairs, leaked tapes, and mounting pressure from Shannon had cornered him. The marriage was as much about saving face as it was about pledging love. Even after the vows, allegations followed. In 2010 and again in 2017, women accused Gene of inappropriate behavior. He denied the claims, often countersuing or dismissing them as baseless, but the whispers built a pattern. The man who once bragged of his exploits was now being judged by them, not celebrated. Shannon stayed by his side, but fans noticed the difference. The fire-breathing demon was now breathing smoke, struggling to separate performance from personal life. For all his bravado, Gene's family became part of his brand. His children, Nick and Sophie, grew up in the public eye thanks to family jewels. At first, it seemed like an effort to soften the demon's image. Simmons as a dad, cracking jokes in the kitchen, balancing fatherhood with fame. But the reality show polish eventually cracked. In 2010, Nick Simmons released a comic book titled Incarnate. Almost immediately, the project imploded under accusations of plagiarism. Fans compared panels directly with scenes from the popular manga Bleach. The similarities were undeniable. The publisher pulled the book, and Nick issued an apology. But the scandal stuck. Critics accused Gene of shielding his son, using his clout to minimize the fallout. It wasn't just Nick's reputation that suffered. It chipped away at Gene's credibility as a self-made icon. Sophie, meanwhile, launched her own career in music and media. She distanced herself from her father's infamy, projecting an image of independence. Yet interviews often circled back to her dad's shadow, forcing her to navigate questions about the empire of excess he'd built. The Simmons children became symbols of what happens when fame is inherited, not earned. The perks are obvious, but the pitfalls are inescapable. Behind the scenes, Shannon was reaching her breaking point. Years of infidelity rumors, combined with public humiliations like Gene posing with women at events, pushed her patience to the edge. On talk shows, she lashed out, calling him a pig and threatening to leave. Therapy sessions broadcast on Family Jewels painted a picture of a family trying to hold together under the weight of a father's ego. By the mid-2000s, Gene's public image fractured. To some, he was still the fire-breathing genius who built Kiss into a billion-dollar machine. To others, he was a man who couldn't control his impulses, dragging his family into controversies they never asked for. The cracks were visible, and for the first time in decades, fans began wondering if the demon's mask was finally slipping. By the 2000s, Gene Simmons had fully embraced his role as not just a musician, but a mogul. If it could carry the Kiss logo, it was fair game. Coffins, condoms, credit cards, even a miniature Kiss golf course. Over 5,000 products bore the band's name, generating well over $1 billion. To fans, it was the ultimate example of turning music into an empire. But behind the applause was growing unease. The cracks showed most clearly in the vault experience of 2017. For $2,000, fans could purchase a giant box set of rare recordings and meet Gene personally. Packages escalated to $50,000 if you wanted a dinner at home with him. Supporters called it the chance of a lifetime. Critics labeled it exploitation, a cash grab aimed at the very people who had built his fortune. Then came the trademark debacle. In 2017, Simmons tried to register the devil horn's hand gesture as his own invention. The backlash was instant and brutal. Rock fans accused him of arrogance, pointing out that John Lennon had used the symbol in the 60s and Ronnie James Dio had popularized it long before Simmons. Within days, he withdrew the filing, but the damage was done. It reinforced the growing belief that Gene wasn't protecting rock culture, he was strip mining it. Even his ventures outside music backfired. Restaurants under the Rock and Brews chain faced lawsuits from former employees over workplace disputes. A football team he co-owned with Paul Stanley collapsed after only a couple of seasons. And while Gene still toured as a solo act, ticket sales sagged in 2025 when VIP packages reached sky-high prices. Several shows had to be canceled due to low demand. To many, it was proof that Gene's legendary business instincts had soured into greed. The boy who once sewed coats from army blankets now demanded thousands of dollars for a handshake. Fans began asking, had the demon lost touch with the very people who made him immortal? For decades, Gene Simmons projected invincibility. He bragged about his women, his money, his empire. He spit fire on stage and refused to apologize. But by his mid-70s, the mask began to slip in ways even he couldn't control. The first crack came in 2018, when his mother, Flora, passed away at age 93. She had survived the Holocaust, immigrated to New York with nothing, and raised Gene alone. Her death hit him harder than fans realized. For the first time, Simmons broke character in public. He admitted that his entire life, his obsession with control, his refusal to commit, his hunger for money, was born from watching his mother suffer and vowing never to feel powerless again. The demon, it seemed, was a scared boy in disguise. More cracks followed. In 2024, during a guest appearance on Dancing with the Stars, his comments about female dancers drew outrage. Instead of laughs, people called him the creepy uncle of rock. Social media tore into him. For the first time, Simmons wasn't the one controlling the narrative. He was the punchline. Then came 2025. Legal filings and insider leaks painted a darker picture. Allegations from former employees suggested troubling incidents behind the scenes. Allegations Gene denied, but the whispers echoed louder than ever. At the same time, he rolled out a fan package costing over $12,000, inviting fans to act as his roadies for a day. Critics called it shameless, proof that the hunger for money had eclipsed everything else. And here lies the dark truth. Gene Simmons, the man who claimed to be untouchable, built an empire so massive that it began to crush him. His family fractured under the weight of his ego. His reputation blurred into scandal. His business moves alienated the very fans who once worshipped him. At 76 years old, Gene is wealthy beyond measure, but haunted by a reality few could have imagined. The demon's legacy isn't just fire and blood. It's the tragic cost of building a life where nothing is ever enough.